The sanctuary was limited on the south by the Great East-West Way, which operated as a separation from Agora on the western side of the north-south plateia, the Greek word for town square, today not visible anymore, while the eastern and western boundaries are not very clear. The best preserved buildings are the great Athena's temple, so-called Cerere's one, with its altar, and the archaic small temple, probably dedicated to the goddess of knowledge as well. Regarding to the other holy structures, the remains of another altar, 2 small temples, and a cloister are well visible. On a 3-step base in the modern period, an isolated column with a point was built with ancient material. The Athena's Doric temple, built at the end of the 6th century BC, was made of local limestone. Majestic columns surrounded the naos, which had to safeguard the sculpture of the cult. At the end of the 1990s, the building underwent a large and complicated conservation restoration, which enabled to pinpoint in many parts traces of painted stucco work, which was needed to highlight the precious decorative elements. The traditional denomination of the building as Cerere's temple dates back to 1700, and many people connected this name to a note quoted by the great memorable of the architecture Vitruvius, who stated this goddess was venerated by the Greeks in front of the doors of the city. The right attribution to Athena is instead to be linked to the votive materials discovered in the votive offerings, and in particular, it is to be linked to small terracotta sculptures exhibited in the museum in the section dedicated to the sanctuary and illustrating the goddess since the most archaic periods. The trabetion of the temple was made up of smooth architrave decorated only with a moulding of ovoli, instead of the canonical smooth frieze characterized by the Doric decoration and by the cornice. After crossing the external columns, peristasis, on the east front, it is possible to enter the naos, which comes after the vestibule, preceded by 4 Ionic columns on the front and on other 2 sides. What today remains of this colonnade is nothing but the basis, some fragments of the columns in the area, and 2 capitals preserved in the near museum. There is no remains of the naos but the floor, 1 meter higher than the one of the external colonnade. The use of 2 architectural orders, Doric for the external part and Ionic for the interior, and the mingling of the elements of the elevation, make this structure one of the most beautiful examples of the late archaic Templar architecture. The temple continued to maintain its cultural function also after the deduction of the Latin column in 273 BC, when a dedication is attested to Minerva, the Greek equivalent of Athena. What is located 30 meters far from the front is the altar, of which the stone base and few elements of the elevation. Immediately on the southeast, the bases of the most ancient building of the town are preserved. Probably it is Athena's first small temple. The wonderful elements in terracotta found out during the excavations of the 1930s bring back to its decoration. What is exhibited in the museum are the plates of the eaves cornice, which are the best kept of the monuments of the city. If you observe carefully, on the posterior part, these plates still have the painted letters necessary to their correct assembly.